Well, I'm trying to do it on my laptop. It's like trying to connect the audio. It's like just spinning wheels right now.
We hear you now.
Got you, Brian. Perfect. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the June 23rd Budget Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we will start tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So before we jump into our agenda this evening, we do have two of our members joining us remotely. So we're going to give them, we need to take a roll call vote. We'll have to do roll call votes for all of our votes this evening. So we're going to take a roll call vote to allow remote participation. So
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to allow remote participation for this evening.
Have a motion?
Second.
And a second. So we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Cutter?
Aye.
Ms. Douglas?
Yes.
I'm an aye. Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
And the ayes have it, so we will allow remote participation for this evening. We'll start with Mr. Barca. Mr. Barca, we'll let you just inform how come you're remote this evening and if anyone is joining you.
Yeah, I am by myself. I am remote because I have COVID and didn't think you guys wanted me there.
Thank you for staying home, and hope you get to feeling better.
I'm feeling pretty good right now, so hopefully by tomorrow.
Good. And Mr. Bork?
I'm away for a couple of days, and I'm alone.
Great. Well, enjoy your time away, and thanks for joining us remote this evening. All right. We'll open it up for public input. Do we have public input? Seeing no one in the room, we'll close public input and open it up to the committee for any review or additions to tonight's agenda. Anything anybody needs to add or wants to add?
No, sir.
All right. Oh, Mr. Bork, did you have something?
Oh.
Okay. Correspondence. We're going to shake up correspondence a little bit this evening, and I've asked Ms. Stevens to kind of help aggregate that moving forward, and so she's going to share that out for the committee and for the public.
Okay.
Stevens?
All right, the correspondence we've had this past month, May 27th, the committee received the town's weekly budget report with April revenues and special balances. May 28th, the meeting minutes from May 26th were shared. June 2nd, the committee received the town's weekly budget report. June 3rd, Mr. Sun shared the school district business administrator report and a town versus school district benefit compensation comparison. June 3rd, Mr. Sun received a request from Mr. Leary to do an analysis of town and school salaries. June 10th, the committee received the town's weekly budget report. June 14th, the committee received notification of town administrator Brown's resignation. June 15th, the committee received the most recent Reimagining GMS and Reinvigorating LMS newsletters. June 16th, Mr. Sun sent the agenda for the June 23rd Budget Committee agenda. June 17th, Ms. Stevens shared questions regarding the library use of the town attorney. June 17th, that was the 17th. June 17th, the library director, Vicki Varick, responded to Ms. Stevens' questions. June 17th, the committee received the town's weekly budget report along with May revenues and special balances. Also, June 17th, the committee received the posting for the town administrator's job notice. And June 21st, Mr. Sun and Mrs. Stevens were invited to a meeting on July 6th to meet with the new BA for the school district to discuss planning for the upcoming budget season.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Next item on our agenda is review and acceptance of our May 26th minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those minutes? And do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to accept the minute.
A motion from Mr. Bork. Do I have a second? Second from Mr. Cutter. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Cutter?
Aye.
Ms. Douglas?
Yes.
I am an aye. Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Abstain.
Mr. Bork?
Yes.
And Mr. Barca?
Yes.
All right, that passes 701. Perfect. Moving on to town business. Mr. Leary is not here with us this evening. But before we jump in, I did want to take a minute Ms. Stevens alluded to it in our correspondence in receiving the notice of resignation from Town Administrator Brown. And just wanted to take a minute and thank him for his work with the Budget Committee over the last several years, at least in the time that I've been a part of the Budget Committee, and many of you for many years prior to that. Always found a very open, honest, collaborative process, excellent at answering questions and really doing his job in leading the town and the various departments to bring forth the best budget forward for our voters. So I know we will sorely miss him as our town administrator here in Litchfield, but just wanted to publicly thank him for his work, specifically through the budget process.
Absolutely.
Since Mr. Leary is not here, are there any questions that we have on the town side that we want to make sure we capture for Mr. Leary?
I mean, we have the question of what our exposure is at the current situation at the town level that's going on. I'm sure people have seen the releases. We have a gentleman acting as chief, I'm assuming as either on a per diem or per weekly basis. What is the budget impact associated with that? What is our long-term exposure? And what insurance do we have to help cover any things that could arise from it? I mean, that has the potential to get pretty interesting.
So I know one of the questions that Ms. Stevens had asked, I think in parallel with your comments, had to do with legal fees that could have been associated with some of the things that I think we saw on social media related to the library.
Yeah.
And so, the response was there have been no legal fees expended up to this point
On what?
pertaining to the library
Library.
related issue. I know the spirit kind of Ms. Stevens' questions was that was a line item that was already overspent as we were for this time of year. So I think in the spirit of your questions, I think those are valid concerns and questions to ask back to the Board of Selectmen. Other thoughts or comments for the town side? Anything we want to capture from Mr. Leary this evening?
Well, it is interesting. I'm just looking at the budget report, right? The town has budgeted $25,721 for the fiscal year, and we've already expended $40,000 and change. So we're
talking about the legal line.
The legal line item, yeah. So we're already over $14,000 halfway through the year.
I'm very much aware, and I'm curious as to whether there's any recourse to collect on some of the costs associated with that, and if not, insurance, or if there's any other avenues that we could pursue. I mean, we can't get into the reason directly, but I'm
Sure.
sure we're all aware
Sure.
of.
And I'm sure if Mr. Leary were here, I don't want to speak for him, but I know a lot of those things being personnel related are difficult for him to respond to, because I think some of those questions did come up at our last meeting, and that was kind of his response at that
Well,
point.
I think a lot of it blew up after the last meeting, honestly. So it'd be interesting, because last meeting, I believe the answer was there are no additional legal fees anticipated. And then
That changed, yes.
clearly that changed.
But that could also be because of Penachuk. There's a number of things that could be a result
Sure.
from. Right?
Sure.
So benefit of the doubt, I think the town should respond to that. In addition to that, just looking at the police salaries budget, I mean, they're all kind of bucketed together in their lines, so you can't really see clearly what's what. But I will say it's looking pretty, at this point, pretty level with where it should be, between 55 and 60% utilized. The one thing that is, I guess, a little bit of a red flag is overtime. Is it overtime? Let me make sure. Excuse me. No, it's part-time officers is the right line item. Part-time officers is running at about 75% already spent year to date.
So I've captured those items as questions that I'll send over to Mr. Leary.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the town side? All right, let's transition to school business. I'll turn it over to Mr. Cutter for any general updates.
I have no updates. So look, at this point in the month, usually I share a business administrator's report. At this point in time, because of the length of June, the month of June, we're actually meeting for a third time during the month next Wednesday. We've held off the business administrator report at our last meeting in lieu of having it for our next meeting, so we can do end of year review, look at any potential encumbrances that the board decides to act upon. And I will certainly share the BA report along with the summary of encumbrances with this board. If not next Wednesday, then certainly by Thursday.
I believe last month we'd asked about like a ledger or an accounting of why there was a deficit in the capital improvement planning or whatever account that is, and where the 726,000 was coming from. Like, why was there a 200? Because they said it was in excess of $200,000 deficit, and that's after moving 726,000.
Yep.
So that's $1 million.
I've asked for kind of a report on that to be
Mhm.
presented at next week's meeting.
Okay.
To understand the ins and outs of that, so we can make an informed decision of what's being returned to the taxpayer,
Right.
what bills do we really need to pay.
Mhm.
So let's hold that.
Well,
And
I hope so, because by then it's
June 30th.
that is June 30th, and that's 2 months into the question. So hopefully
if there are
there's-
any other questions, I would encourage them to be sent again,
right.
which I haven't received. So,
It's been a bad month for
well,
no. But so that's why I held off on last month's question. Was that I checked, so that was last month's question as to where that was.
So, I think building off that last point, one of the things that I'm going to make sure we emphasize, Ms. Stevens alluded to this, that we've been invited to meet the new school BA.
Mhm.
And really the spirit of that meeting is twofold. One, I think to discuss some of the CIP projects that are that the school is looking at. But also the main focus is really around the budget planning process for the year. I think getting the new BA, having a conversation of what have we done historically, what has worked, what might we be interested in tweaking. I think one of the things that I would like to bring to that conversation in addition to it will be, we want to ensure that we have good dialogue and rapport with the school BA and the opportunity to ask those questions so that when they do come up, and a member ask a question and we facilitate that back through the school board, what's a reasonable expectation to have those questions answered? And I think with a new BA coming in and kind of setting those expectations out of the gate, I think it's a great place to start. In my opinion, I think a majority of those questions could be answered from this in between meetings without us having to wait to the next meeting to get those answers.
what may be surprising to some, but probably not to others, is I didn't know about this meeting. And as the school board rep to the budget committee, as well as the school board rep to the CIP, I'd like to join that meeting. So if I would ask Mr. Sun, you to forward that invite, I would appreciate it.
I was just going to ask, who is invited to that meeting?
Yeah, so that meeting is myself and Ms. Stevens, Ms. Harrison, Superintendent Jetty, the new BA, Mr. Weber, I believe. I believe those are all of the attendees.
We would just need to confirm, right? If Ms. McDonald's not a part of that, if she is, then it would create a quorum of the school board, which I don't want.
I will, I don't believe she's on that current invite. So I will circle back with Superintendent Jetty on that. Other questions for Mr. Cutter?
I have one,
Yes, sir.
but part of it's already been answered. During the last school board meeting, Mr. Cotter mentioned that the budget committee had requested information as far as comparing salaries with the town and the school. And I don't recall the budget committee ever requesting that information. And now I'm hearing that it's Mr. Leary who requested that information. So I think that if the member is going to reach out to the chair and ask a question, then that question should be posed by that member, not by the committee. Because I didn't ask for that information, nor as far as I know, any board.
Yeah, so to close the loop on that, Mr. Leary did ask a question that came out of the sharing of the school board putting together the school and town insurance packages and policies and doing a comparison of those. He asked a follow-up question to that. He did send that directly to me and ask about an analysis of salaries between the town and the school. I shared that with Mr. Cutter. I also had a conversation with Ms. Harrison about that as well. I think before or after one of our last school facilities meetings. I have since circled back, probably since the last school board meeting, because it was late last week when I did have a follow-up conversation with Mr. Leary. I watched the school board meeting. I think one of the challenges with this is that comparing like salaries from the town to the school district How do you compare, a principal and what's the like job on the other side? Is that the police chief? Is that the fire chief? What does that look like? So I did let Mr. Leary know that what I will do in the month of July, since we're not meeting, I'll take the time to do this, is I'm going to take a lot of that information because it's public knowledge. I'm going to put it in one spreadsheet so that it's easily accessible. And if people want to have the ability to look and compare, it's there in one spot for them to do that.
Yeah.
My concern is that it's an individual on the committee who's requesting this information, not the committee.
Right. So in the past, what's happened is the answer is usually included with your initial request and then distributed to the committee.
Correct. And there has been no answer to that question. I think, Mr. Bork, had there been a response to that question with data and information provided, I would have absolutely shared that out with the committee. We up until late last week, we were still trying to determine what the school board was going to provide, what we could put together and makes the most sense to answer Mr. Leary's question.
Again, my only concern, it came from Cutter that the budget committee was requesting the information.
Right. So to his point, I think the question it would have been nice to have seen the original question, because I was like, I don't remember that discussion. Where'd that come from? So to have the original question perhaps distributed, so at least we know what you're talking about.
Yeah. My
Would've
inquiry was from the chairman, right? And so I'm
Right.
interpreting that as a budget committee question.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm happy to kind of take this offline. I guess a question to the group would be, has past practice been when a question has come from an individual member to the chair, has that question been shared out to the committee prior to getting a response to said question?
I would assume it depends how long there was essentially some kind of feedback that was provided.
Not electronic.
No.
There was the salary, the insurance thing,
That was different. That was
The insurance was a result of a school activity and work done by the school that the school board discussed and then was shared with the budget committee for information.
Yeah. And
it wasn't a request of the budget committee.
And out of that information being shared, Mr. Leary said, in addition to this, could the school also provide a salary comparison between the town and the school? And there has been no formal response to his question that's been provided in writing. It's been conversations trying to determine how we best collect that information. What would that information entail? So there really hasn't been an answer to that question yet.
I don't know how I don't know. Because that's a unique, because usually there's a question then an answer.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
correct.
not what happened.
And
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine sharing questions in advance of getting answers. I just don't want to create too far of a thread. To me, it makes sense if a member asks a question to get the response to that and then for that to be shared out to the committee as information.
So there was a question about the library, perhaps
Yes.
that could have
I
been.
did not share that out. That came
Right.
in, that was end of last week.
week,
I was
yeah.
out of town last
No,
week
that's-
when that came through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Bork, are you good with your question on that side? I mean, I think we heard kind of your concern from that standpoint. I think there's been no answer that's been given to that question yet. And I think moving forward, any answer that we do get from the school board or for any future questions, we'll make sure that we share that out with the full committee.
I guess my concern is the fact that there's 9 of us. Sounds like it's the budget committee that question. And I think of a threat a while ago from the selectmen that rainbow tape taken off the signpost. It's the select people, right? Is it all of them? The one? I don't know.
If a question is asked from a member to the chair and the chair poses that question, is that question seen as a collective question from the committee or a question from an individual member? I mean, in my opinion, it would be a question from an individual member unless the group agreed collectively to ask that. So
Yeah, my thoughts, if a question comes from one of us, it comes from all of us because we all represent the budget committee.
Yeah, if it's discussed, it comes from all of us. If it's not discussed, I don't think it does.
No, I agree on that.
If it
sense.
was, yeah, if it was an offline question, then I agree with Brian.
Right, because the reason it gets channeled through the chair is just so that the people on the other side aren't like, I heard from this person, I heard from this person, I heard from this
To
person. I heard from
streamline
it's to,
communication.
there's one point of contact. So whether I ask a question or you ask a question, and especially at budget season, those are individual questions funneled. So, you know, a member of the budget committee would ask, I think at that point we're splitting hairs over semantics.
I think in terms of school updates, that is about it.
There was a question, I'm sorry, there was a question about any cost impacts resulting from schedule shifts in the LMS project. Have we decided, has it been figured out whether or not?
So LMS work is commencing. The latest report that I have is the same newsletter that likely a lot of people receive that are tracking it. So at the end of the school year, so I guess beginning this week, right? Work was scheduled to commence. Whether it has or has not, I don't know, but I was told it was
Right.
going to, and it was under an aggressive plan to be a good portion of it completed over the summer months.
Mhm.
Yes, there's going to be some run over into the school year for sure. But they're doing what they can to get done, what they can get done over the summer.
I have a little more information on that, and I can share that during school facilities because we
Okay.
did talk about that at our June, I believe it was June 8th facilities committee.
Okay.
Andrew, is there a list of potential encumbrances the board's considering before the end of the year?
Yeah, great question, Derek. That has not been presented to the board yet. We're meeting for a third time next week. Given that it's a kind of a longer month and we're able to get 3 meetings in. So the board will be reviewing that next Wednesday, and I'll certainly share that with the committee.
So when do your encumbrances have to be identified by?
We have to review them and identify them and action them by the end of the month.
So you have not yet received them. You're going to see them next Wednesday and
We
have
ha-
to have a
we
decision
have
by
a-
Thursday.
We have a draft list. This list is probably a month old at this point that I've seen. And my understanding is things were coming and going off that list, so it wasn't
Mhm.
final.
I would be concerned as a taxpayer that you guys are going to meet next Wednesday and have to have a decision by next Thursday.
I
That's
assume you guys will make
Very tight.
decisions that
that's
evening.
just,
I also don't think there's a record number of encumbrances that will be considered.
no, I appreciate
could be
that.
wrong.
But I know that budget committee bylaws are, you can't vote on something until the second meeting. So I find
Yeah,
it,
but that's not the school bylaws.
no,
Or
clearly
it's
not.
So
Doesn't mean that that's a good thing.
Here, at the same time, any encumbered funds, you have to have a PO by, I believe, June 30th,
That's
the end of the school year. So if you have POs right now, most likely they're not going to be encumbering anything.
No, yeah, my point is the school board has not seen a list and yet the decision is due a week from today. I don't know. I like to take time to review before I commit myself, but that's just me. So I find that intriguing. That's all I'm saying. I find that
Again,
intriguing.
it's not a list.
You just broke up.
Sorry, we missed that last part, Brian.
I said, maybe there's not a list. I'm just saying, I mean, in the past, and Derek will attest to this, is send it to the school board, they vote on it, but you have to like have a PO in place before the end of the school year.
there's
So-
still time to do that the day after.
Yeah. I was just, the reason I asked is that typically, if I recall, we usually had the list ahead of time, though. We knew it was coming.
Anything else for Mr. Cutter?
Yeah, from the BA report, is there any way to be able to get some detail as to the underspend in the categories instruction total, student support service total, and instructional staff support total?
Sure. Yeah, just shoot that as a note and we'll get that action.
Thank you. All right, moving on to
Just to follow up on the expenditures decision, I received just today the agenda for next week's meeting, school board meeting. And within our agendas, there's usually hyperlinks
Mhm.
to files. Under the BA report for next week, there's year-end expenditures, but there's no hyperlink. So that is not made available quite yet.
All right, moving on to member input and new business. We'll start with an update on the CIP.
Well, we have the townwide one. They met at the beginning of the month. They discussed highway. So the highway came in and discussed the potential for investment in roads and getting ahead of there, as well as talking about investment in fleet expenditures. So right now, every department's coming in with this is what I could use and this is how it would benefit me. And so they're working through the various departments. That's where we've met with the fire department as well as the highway. And so we'll be continuing forward.
Is that a monthly cadence that's continuing?
There was talk about in shortening the schedules a bit, so that there was potential for a meeting on this past Monday, but the rooms weren't open, so there was not one. So there is a potential that it could go to twice a month, but right now it's monthly.
Just to try to get through all those departments.
Right. So it's ongoing discussions, talking.
And then just to help, I think I asked this last time, and maybe I'm asking it again for my own clarification. Out of those meetings, the goal, and Mr. Cutter, I know you're part of this as well, the goal is to then take a recommendation from CIP to the Board of Selectmen on priorities leveraging ESSER funds, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now, every department has their, for want of a better word, wish list, and how it would benefit their department, and then it'll be up to the CIP to review those and prioritize.
And does the Board of Selectmen have a time frame by which they want to have that decision made?
I believe there was a discussion of October, November. It was earlier than I expected.
The idea is we were trying to run it like 2020, right? And the decisions and going through the public hearing process and then ultimately the approval by the select board, that would be somewhere in the September, October timeframe. So everyone would have kind of the information required to get through budget season.
Okay.
I think the big loss in this is with the moving on of Town Administrator Brown and how fluid this process is going to. Because in that committee meeting, we also talked about meeting 2 or 3 times over June. We haven't done that. And I don't know that we're meeting in July or what the plan, because our meeting would be scheduled for July 4th. That's
There was
obviously not gonna
discussion,
happen.
but nothing got finalized.
Right, nothing got finalized.
I reached out to Troy and asked when the next meeting was. It was supposed to be obviously slated for July 4th. That's not going to happen. So now it's pushed at least August.
To August, you said, Brian?
That's not.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's what
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and by that point, Troy will no longer be with us.
Right.
So
August 7th, right?
August
Yeah.
7th is his
Yeah.
last day. Yeah.
Now, is that his last day, or is he going to take a vacation before that? So his physical last day is 2 weeks before that.
Good question. I'm not sure.
Ooh.
That is what I am going to include in the list of questions that I have from Mr. Leary. I am going to include a question around kind of the Board of Selectmen's timeline and thought process for hiring a new BA and how that impacts our budget season process. Because
TA,
TA, sorry. If, Town Administrator Brown's last day is August 7th and there's a gap from when someone else would start, our budgeting process starts about 6 to 7 weeks after his last day.
So the
So
old school budget styling with the Board of Selectmen.
yeah, so I just to understand what their thought process is going into budget season. I'm going to include that in the question. All right. Anything else for CIP? All right. School.
Just to
Okay.
jump back on the school encumbrances thing, as mentioned, I did receive a draft report. It wasn't final. This is going back now several weeks, so I have no idea what's coming and going. I did pull that up. There's not anything material on here. They're talking about maybe replacing the CHS, the Gator that they use as a frontline machine, which I can tell you, I've seen it. It's fine. LMS stage elevator is a potential, and an ADA compliant ramp for the GMS cafeteria.
All right.
There's nothing.
Then they can work on the other list of why there's a $200 and some odd thousand deficit and where the $726,000 came from. So good.
School facilities update. So our school facilities, we were actually scheduled to meet yesterday. We did not due to some conflicts. And we do not. There's a meeting I believe scheduled in July. The main update. There was an email update that came since we did not collectively meet. Probably the biggest update was that there has been kind of a setback in the land purchase piece. And so there was work was being done to try to remedy that situation. I don't have any more details than that. And I don't know if Mr. Cutter does or if it's anything that can be shared, but that is what I know about that. Working backwards from there, we did meet on June 8th as a school facilities committee. We spent kind of the first part of that meeting, I think, really unpacking related to the elementary project, really understanding architects' fees. And I think part of that came out of conversation that was had here at our last budget committee meeting. And so Kyle Barker actually kind of walked through drawings that are involved, people that are involved in creating a lot of that, and really to help kind of, and obviously those meetings are public, they're broadcast. And so really to help understand what fees are associated with those drawings, why it is larger than $5,000 because of the work that's behind that. So we spent time going through that. We spent some time talking about school funding, and that team is working to have the building aid application finished by a week from today. The note was that it's a little bit harder to do without sight, but the state has told us to submit the application and kind of move forward from there. We mentioned there's a conversation around land, which we talked about, so it's kind of a moot point at this time. Probably the rest of the meeting was spent talking about LMS. And so back to Ms. Douglas's question from earlier, we were actually shown a visual map of LMS, which kind of gave an overview of the work to be done this summer. So it's broken into phases. That work has started. So phase 1 is the 5th, 6th, 7th grade bank of classrooms. Phase 2 is the gym and locker room to classrooms renovation. Phase 3 is the cafeteria and music rooms. So the goal is to have phase 1, 2, and 3 completed before the start of school. And the way it was explained to us, the reason they can move very quickly through those is there's nobody there. There's nobody there in the buildings. There is a possibility of a 4th phase, a hallway and bathrooms near the 7th grade classrooms, that if the stars align, they could try to get that work done before school starts. And then, continuing to work on the, contingency plan of what's done after that. Basically, the phases that are left after that will take more time into the spring, because we will have bodies in the school, and occupancy makes it a lot harder to finish that work. I think kind of the discussion was it's a rather aggressive timeline.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have an aggressive timeline, I think, for that, to try to get as much of that work done while students and teachers are not in the building. So, optimistic that gets completed. That was really the bulk of the conversation from the last school facilities meeting. Mr. Bork, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to it.
No,
Okay.
that's covered.
Any questions for school facilities? Any follow-up from
So I guess then the question, there had been rumors of buses and shifting kids, so there's no additional cost associated with those things?
At this point, that's the contingency plan.
Okay.
That is not by any means, any shape, any form, the plan.
there were, and I don't, I mean, this is a public meeting,
Right.
there were conversations around if those 4 phases were complete, could you in theory not have to move anybody by having some people be on carts?
Right.
There are scenarios where I think they're trying to determine what's best for the teachers, what's best for the kids, and the most cost-effective way to do it.
Well, like I said, I appreciate that they've gone back and looked at that, because I know my kid is no longer in district, but those are his cohort of friends. So I've heard a lot of the discussion around that plan. And so I'm glad to hear that there's been an attempt to refine that to the benefit of the kids, at least.
Great. Anything else? School facilities? Good. Any questions for school facilities? Any additional questions? All right. Any other member input or new business items? Seeing none, I will open it up for public input once again. No one in the room, I will close it for public input and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Douglas, a second by Mr. Hayes. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Cutter?
Aye.
Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
I'm an aye. Ms. Stevens.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Mr. Bork.
Yes.
And Mr. Barca.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Just as a reminder, Budget Committee does not meet in the month of July. So we will see you all back on Thursday, August 25th. Just as a reminder, the committee, we have a couple of meetings, and then we really get into that budget process starting in late September. So we'll have a couple of meetings when we come back from our July break and really get into our budget planning for the town and then for the schools. So everybody has a wonderful summer, and thank you all.
Thank you.